By the time my wife thanked me for loving the orchard enough to let it change, she had already decided what part of me needed to disappear for that to happen. She stood on the stage in the lantern barn with my mother's amber necklace at her throat and said it with a voice full of warmth and patience, as if she were explaining something merciful to a room full of people who had all come dressed for generosity. My younger brother was beside her, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other around a glass of cider he had not paid for, smiling at the county banker and the tourism board chair like he had already moved into the future she was describing. That was the first lie of the evening. Not the part about loving the orchard. I did love it. Enough to stay when everyone sensible left. Enough to bury my father under the North Ridge maple and then go back to pruning trees 3 days later because frost does not honor grief. Enough to spend 29 years in boots and denim and debt and late-night payroll calculations because some pieces of land get into your bones and refuse to be traded for cleaner lives. The lie was the part where she made it sound as though change and removal were the same thing. They are not. My name is Eli Barrett. I am 52 years old. My family has grown apples in the hills outside Blue Ridge, Georgia, since 1948, when my grandfather came home from the war with a bad knee, a young wife, and a belief that land was the only thing honest enough to spend a life on. He bought 97 acres on the south slope of Rich Mountain and planted the first rows himself with 2 hired men and a tractor that broke more often than it moved. The orchard is larger now, not dramatically, 214 acres in total, though only 140 are in active production. Apples mostly, some pears, a small cider operation, a farm store, a tasting room. Event business in the old tobacco barn my father converted 12 years ago after deciding weddings were easier to survive than commodity pricing. People from Atlanta drive up in the fall and photograph their children against our trees. Brides in expensive linen dresses get married under the string lights. Food bloggers write sentences about rustic sophistication while standing in mud they are trying not to touch with their shoes. I have made peace with all of it. An orchard is not a museum. Land either works, or it gets sold by people who use the word legacy a lot, right up until the documents are signed. My father understood that. He was not an easy man, not cruel, not warm either, just built from the sort of discipline that leaves little room for softness and no room at all for self-pity. He believed trees should be pruned hard, debts should be faced early, and men who talk too much about vision usually do not know what season they are standing in. My mother, Helen, was the other side of the farm. She handled books, church women, funeral casseroles, tasting room volunteers, and every difficult conversation with the grace my father never developed because he never saw the need. She knew when a customer wanted a refund and when they wanted to feel listened to first. She knew how to make a wedding party of 12 demanding women feel that they had all been personally understood. She also knew exactly when my father was wrong and had the patience to wait until the kitchen was empty before telling him so. I inherited my father's sense of duty and my mother's ability to stay quiet until quiet becomes useful. My brother, Connor, inherited neither. Connor was 47 then. Good-looking in the loose, unfinished way some men remain good-looking because life keeps giving them new mirrors before the old ones have time to become honest. He could charm a table, waste $1, tell a story better than the truth, and leave before consequences got their coat on. There had been a landscaping company in Birmingham once, a marina deal outside Mobile, a vacation rental scheme in Destin, a restaurant supply partnership in Knoxville that went under so fast it barely had time to collect debt. Every failure had an explanation. Every explanation had villains. None of them were him. Then our father died. That was 18 months before the harvest dinner. Heart attack in the equipment shed. Quick, brutal, no grand speech, no hand on my shoulder. Just a man who had stood his whole life going still on a Tuesday in February while sleet tapped on the metal roof. My father left the orchard to me. That surprised nobody. He left Connor 30 acres of timberland on the east boundary, which was generous considering Connor had not worked a full season on the farm since he was 19 and had once told my father he would rather sell dirt to developers than spend another life crawling around under leaf mold. He left my daughter June 10% of the company in trust, effective at 25. That part I did not fully understand until later. June was 26 now, smart, observant, too much like my mother not to see through most people within 10 minutes. She had studied plant pathology in Oregon and spent 3 years out west working with a vineyard disease lab before coming home the summer after my father died, because, as she put it, somebody in this family needs to know the difference between rot and weather. My wife, Vivian, came to the orchard 15 years earlier as an event planner from Atlanta who had been hired to help us make the tasting room look less like a room men used to stack fertilizer in. She was 33 then, precise, beautiful without seeming to try for it, calm in rooms where other people frayed, better with donors and brides and people with money than I had ever been or wanted to be. She understood presentation, flow, atmosphere. She knew how to turn rough wood and hay bales and cider barrels into something rich people described as authentic while still paying a premium to stand near it. I loved her almost at once, not because she made the farm easier, because she made it seem legible to someone outside it. When we married, people said she polished the place. At the time, I thought that was praise. Now I know polish and removal often enter through the same door. The first year after my father died was bad in almost every way a farm year can be bad without becoming biblical. A late frost burned the blossoms on the lower blocks. Then fire blight took 21 trees in the west rows before June spotted it early enough to stop the spread. Then a distributor out of Chattanooga delayed payment on a contract large enough to make payroll feel personal. I slept poorly, worked too much, missed meals, pushed through a chest flutter one afternoon in August, and then another in September before June forced me to see a cardiologist in town. It turned out to be atrial fibrillation, manageable, medication, less caffeine, more sleep, fewer 16-hour days in August heat. To me it was annoying. To Vivian it became useful. She never lied outright. That is important. Outright lies are clumsy things, easy to catch, easy to name. What she did instead was soften the ground around me. She said I was tired, said the farm needed more help, said grief and responsibility had taken a toll, said Connor's arrival had come at exactly the right moment because maybe finally I could learn that leadership was not the same thing as carrying every crate myself. Connor had shown up 3 weeks after my father's funeral with a truck full of duffel bags and failure. His girlfriend in Knoxville had left him. The restaurant supply partnership was done. He said he only needed a place for a little while, wanted to help, wanted to be closer to family, wanted to see whether he could reconnect with what matters. I should have turned him away. Instead, I let him take the old caretaker's cottage at the East Orchard line and gave him the event logistics work because weddings require charm, and Connor had always carried charm the way other men carried knives. At first it seemed useful. He handled vendors, brushed groomsmen into jackets, carried boxes, made brides laugh, stayed late to help break down crews. He was good at all the visible things, better than I expected. Then, slowly, he became good at being seen doing them. Vivian liked that. Of course she did. She began saying we in meetings where she used to say you. We should revisit the pricing tiers. We need a stronger hospitality strategy. We cannot keep pretending the farm store alone will carry winter. We should think about what the property becomes in 10 years instead of what it has been for 70. At first, I thought that was marriage. Then I noticed Connor using the same pronoun. We need to think bigger. We should invite more investors to the lantern dinner. We could do so much with the North Ridge if we stopped being sentimental about trees no one photographs. The first time I knew they had become intimate in some form was not because I caught them kissing. It was because of a silence. Silence between two people is like grain in wood. You either know how to read it or you don't. I came in from the lower blocks one evening near sunset, boots muddy, shirt damp, and stepped into the tasting room to find the two of them standing in the back service corridor by the wine fridge. Nothing dramatic, no embrace, no obvious guilt, just too close, in too much quiet. Already inside a private moment that had nothing to do with me. They moved apart when they saw me. A half-second too late. That was in May. I said nothing then. That was the first act of revenge. Silence. Because once suspicion becomes clear enough to hurt, the next question is not what you feel. It is what can be proved. I called Ruth Harlan the next day. Ruth had been my family's lawyer since before June was born, and my father's lawyer before that. 69. White hair, blue suits, eyes like a woman who had spent 40 years watching men discover paper too late. When I told her I needed discretion, she said, "Family? Yes. Business too? Yes." "Good," she said. "That means they've already made records." She sent me to a forensic accountant named Marcus Lee. Marcus was 56, tireless, polite, and completely without romance about money, which made him exactly who I needed. Within 9 days, he found two things. The first was a shell company called Ridge Standard Hospitality Consulting, registered in Tennessee, no staff, no public presence. Its beneficial owner was Connor Barrett. The second was a series of payments from Barrett Orchard Holdings into Ridge Standard, consulting retainers, event optimization fees, guest experience strategy, approved through Vivian's access on the company accounts. Total, $112,000 over 11 months. That was enough to tell a story. Then Marcus found the larger one, draft board packets, preliminary loan documents, email chains with a hospitality development group out of Asheville called Black Hollow Leisure, a valuation request on the North Ridge, architectural concepts for a boutique lodge and spa, and, buried in meeting notes, a phrase I have never forgotten. Eli's health may create a compassionate path to interim leadership if timing requires. Compassionate path. That was how they meant to remove me. Not with force, with concern. With careful hands on my elbows and sad eyes and remarks about stress and the burden of keeping up what my father built. I sat in Marcus's office reading that sentence while the air conditioner rattled in the window and thought, oddly, of my mother making pie crust in Silence the Christmas my father accused her of over-ordering ribbons for the wreaths because the supplier bill had bothered him. She had rolled dough for 3 minutes without a word, then finally said, "There are men who mistake being obeyed for being loved." I had not understood then. I understood now. Ruth brought me the next part. My mother's amendment. 6 months before she died, while I was still too busy to notice how closely she and June had begun speaking, Helen Barrett had placed the North Ridge under a conservation easement held jointly with the Georgia Agricultural Land Trust and June Barrett as contingent family steward. I owned the orchard company. I controlled the event barn, the tasting room, the store, the cider operation, the lower blocks, the housing, the equipment, all of it. But the North Ridge, the panoramic slope Black Hollow wanted for its lodge, the piece Connor kept calling underutilized, the ground Vivian had quietly built their whole future around, could not be developed. Not into hospitality, not into a resort, not into anything but agricultural or conserved land, absent consent from June and the trust. June had not consented. She was never going to. Vivian didn't know. Connor certainly didn't. I sat with Ruth in her office while she slid the documents across to me, and for the first time since March I felt something almost like calm. Not joy, never that, but the cold, steady balance that comes when the structure beneath you turns out to be stronger than the people trying to push you off it. "What do you want?" Ruth asked. I thought about it for a long time. Not because I didn't know, because saying it aloud would fix it in the world. "I want them witnessed," I said. She nodded once. Then we choose the room. The room was the Harvest Lantern dinner. Every October, after the main pick but before the frost got serious, we hosted a formal dinner in the Lantern Barn for distributors, local donors, county officials, a few longtime customers, the bank, and whichever newspaper wanted to pretend North Georgia agriculture still made romantic copy. It was part fundraiser, part gratitude exercise, part social test of who still mattered. Vivian loved that dinner. She made it look effortless every year. String lights through the rafters, candlelight on old wood tables, pressed linens, apples polished to the point of vanity in cedar crates at the corners. Music just soft enough to suggest taste without blocking the conversations people came to have. This year she insisted on making it bigger. That interested me. She wanted more bank people, more local press, more Asheville guests, more business leaders from town, more board members than usual. Of course she did. If you are going to take a man's life's work away from him under the language of care, you want witnesses who already admire your lighting. I told her yes to everything. That was the second act of revenge. Permission. I let her choose the flowers. I let Connor handle sponsor seating. I let Black Hollow send 2 representatives. I let the county banker believe he might be attending a celebration of vision. Meanwhile, Ruth prepared the legal filings. Marcus finalized the audit. June built the presentation. She did not ask whether I was sure. She had my mother's patience and my father's intolerance for being made a fool of. Once, late, while we were sitting in the projection loft above the barn with spreadsheets open and the old ladder creaking under our weight, she said, "Mom always thought she was the smartest person in the room." She often was. June nodded. Not tonight. On the evening of the lantern dinner, the air turned cold enough by sunset that guests wrapped their coats around themselves as they crossed the gravel drive from the parking field to the barn. The mountains beyond the ridge were already dark. Inside, the lanterns made the room glow honey gold. Apples and pears sat in old wooden boxes near the doors. The smell was wax, cider, cedar, roast chicken, smoke from the outdoor fire pits, and money. I wore my father's black dinner jacket. He bought it in 1988 for some regional growers' award banquet and said once that a man in agriculture should own one good jacket even if he only needed it every 10 years. Vivian wore deep green silk and my mother's amber necklace. That hurt more than I expected. Not because she looked beautiful, because she had taken the right to beauty from the wrong hands. Connor moved through the room like he was already being congratulated on something. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, laughed too freely, and made sure he was seen beside the Black Hollow men often enough that people would start building their own conclusions before anyone said a word. I said little. That unsettled Vivian more than anger would have. Twice she touched my arm and asked if I was all right. I smiled and said I was fine. That answer by then had begun to frighten her. Dinner was served at 8. Speeches began at 9. The bank president said a few words about resilience. The county tourism chair thanked us for preserving regional culture while evolving hospitality standards, which was such a perfect sentence for the evening I almost admired it. Then Vivian stood, lantern light on her face, my mother's amber at her throat. The room settled because she was beautiful, because she was practiced, and because people trust women who appear calm in old barns. She spoke about my father first, about the stubbornness required to keep a family farm alive in a century that would prefer land become scenery or event space or tax shelter. She spoke about my mother, too, about grace, steadiness, community. I watched June in the loft above the room, half hidden behind the technical screen, still as wire. Then Vivian shifted, only slightly. The tone changed first. Less remembrance, more thesis. She began talking about burden, sustainability, the emotional demands of stewardship, the importance of adaptability, the need for families to face what land can no longer be if they are serious about ensuring what it still might become. There it was, the soft language of removal. Then she looked at me and smiled that warm, public wife smile, the one I used to mistake for love because I didn't yet understand how often affection can be used as staging. No one, she said, has loved Barrett Orchard more fiercely than Eli. And sometimes the deepest love is the kind willing to release a thing into its next life. Applause. Small. Polite. Enough. Then she invited Connor up to speak. My brother took the microphone with one of his easy little self-effacing laughs, like he could not believe he had been put in this position, and was only reluctantly accepting the burden of saying what everyone sensible already understood. He spoke about family, about roots, about honoring history while refusing to be trapped inside it. He thanked me for my years of devotion. He said the farm was entering a season that required broader vision and steadier support. Then he looked toward the bank table and the Black Hollow men and said, "We're proud tonight to begin sharing that future." That was my cue. I stood. No hurry, no dramatic scrape of chair legs. Just enough. The room quieted immediately, because no matter how well Connor could smile through a sentence, everyone there still knew whose land they were standing on. I walked to the stage. Connor stepped back half a pace. Vivian's face did something very small and very telling. Not fear. Calculation arriving late. I took the microphone from my brother's hand. It came easier than I expected. "My father used to say," I began, "that the worst thing you can do to a piece of land is let someone who doesn't understand it start calling greed by prettier names." No one laughed. Good. I held up the first folder. "For the past 11 months, I said, money has been moving out of Barrett Orchard Holdings into a shell company called Ridge Standard Hospitality Consulting." The Black Hollow men stopped smiling. "That company belongs to my brother." Stillness moved through the room like weather. Vivian took one step toward me. "Eli," she said quietly, "this isn't—" I looked at her. "This is exactly what it is." I signaled once to the loft. The projector behind me lit the whitewashed barn wall. No sentimental harvest slideshow, no family photos, just documents. Transfer records, LLC filings, bank approvals, draft board minutes, and, on the third slide, the sentence in her own hand. "Eli's health may create a compassionate path to interim leadership if timing requires." Someone near the bank table made a small, involuntary sound. I kept speaking. While my wife and brother were discussing stewardship, they were also discussing how my heart medication, my workload, and my grief over my father might be used to remove me from operational control of this farm. The room had gone past silence into something stronger. Recognition, not of details, of type. Everybody there knew some version of what they were looking at. Family ambition dressed as concern. Money wearing sympathy like a borrowed coat. Connor found his voice first. "You're making this ugly." "No," I said. "You did. I'm just refusing to let you narrate it." Then I held up the second packet. "This is correspondence with Black Hollow Leisure regarding the development of the North Ridge into a boutique hospitality property." The Black Hollow men looked at each other. Vivian had gone very still. "But there's one problem," I said. I nodded again toward the loft. The next slide appeared. My mother's easement papers, the recorded deed, June's name, the agricultural land trust seal. 6 months before she died, I said, my mother placed the North Ridge into permanent agricultural conservation with June as family steward. No resort, no lodge, no spa, no development, no future built on selling what she knew would be the first thing greedy people reached for. Now I looked directly at Vivian, then at Connor. "Neither of you knew that," I said, "which tells me everything I need to know about how well you understood the land you were trying to take." June came down from the loft then. Steady. Calm. "My mother's grandson?" "No," Granddaughter. Correct. She crossed the floor in a dark dress and work boots hidden beneath the hem because she had never been entirely willing to let anyone fully clean the orchard out of her. She took the spare microphone from the side table. "I do not consent," she said. That was all. No speech, no theatrics, just the future speaking in one sentence. Connor laughed once. A bad sound. A man reaching for disbelief because it is the last room still unlocked. "This is insane." Ruth stood from the second table on the left. "No," she said. "It is enforceable." That ended him more thoroughly than anything else could have. There is a specific expression men like Connor wear when they realize charm has no place left to sit. He had it then. Vivian, to her credit, did not beg. She looked at me across the stage and said very softly, "You could have spoken to me first." I stared at her for a long time. Then I said the truest thing I have ever said into a microphone. "You stopped speaking to me before you started planning my replacement." That landed. I saw it. Not because it wounded her pride, because it touched something that may once have been human in her before strategy learned how to dress itself as necessity. I set the microphone down. That was all. No police, no screaming, no flung wine glasses or dramatic exits. Just a room full of well-dressed people watching a marriage, a betrayal, and a business resort themselves in real time around documents that no longer cared about anyone's version of events. The banker left first. The Black Hollow men followed within 3 minutes. A county commissioner shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry for the evening," in the tone men use when they mean both the humiliation and the fact that they had enjoyed the clarity of it. People began drifting out, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with the hungry alertness of those who know tomorrow's town talk has just been handed to them warm. Connor found me behind the barn 40 minutes later near the cider tanks. He had been drinking. Not enough to stagger, enough to loosen whatever little dignity he had left. "You humiliated me," he said. The night air smelled like apples, cold earth, diesel from the generator, and the first frost still thinking about whether it meant business. "You stole from me," I said. "You always thought this place was yours." "It is mine. Dad loved me too." I looked at him then. Really looked. My brother at 47, still standing on borrowed ground and confusing that with entitlement. "He left you 30 acres of timber," I said. "You should have treated that like a mercy." He stepped closer. "And Vivian?" There it was. The last little knife. Men with failed plans always reach for pettiness. I said, "If she had actually chosen you, you wouldn't have needed my bank account too." That took the rest out of him. He left the property by morning. His truck was gone before sunrise. The civil suit took 9 months. Marcus recovered most of the money. Not all. Enough. Connor signed a settlement agreement that barred him from any operational role or claim beyond the timber parcel he had almost immediately mortgaged for reasons I never bothered learning. Vivian and I divorced the following spring. Not loudly, not nobly either. Just in conference rooms and with signatures and the strange, airless fatigue that comes when you are not dividing a marriage so much as cataloging where it ended. She asked for the event accounts she had built. I gave her the client list and nothing else. She asked for my mother's amber necklace. I said no, not because I am sentimental about jewelry, because sometimes refusal is the only honest ceremony left. June moved back home fully that summer. She took over orchard health, then inventory planning, then more than that. Watching her in the packing shed with a clipboard under one arm and dirt on her boots, and my mother's patience in the set of her shoulders, healed something in me I had not understood was still torn. We held the Harvest Lantern dinner again the next year. Smaller. No Black Hollow men. No banking theatrics. No speech from anyone who used the word vision more than once. At the end of the evening, after the last guests had gone and staff were stacking chairs, and the barn smelled of wax and cider and extinguished candles, June stood beside me under the rafters and asked, Do you regret doing it publicly? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. Then, after a moment, I regret that I needed to. She nodded. That sounds right. Outside, the orchard was dark and still. The north ridge held its shape against the stars. My mother had known, long before I did, what part of the land people would try to sell first. My father had known, long before I admitted it, that Connor would always confuse charm with worth. Maybe that is what age is. Not wisdom exactly. Pattern recognition sharpened by loss. The thing I came to understand after all of it was this. They thought the farm's weakness was love. My love for the land, my love for my wife, my love for my brother, even after every warning sign had already bloomed. They thought affection made me soft. What they did not understand was that real love, the kind rooted deep enough to survive weather, is not softness at all. It is structure. It is what remains after storms have stripped away everything decorative. And when the weight finally came down, I was not the one who broke. The orchard is still there. That is my ending. Not revenge. Not really. Though there was a certain satisfaction in watching two people who believed they were the smartest ones in the barn discover that my dead mother had already anticipated them and laid the track accordingly. But satisfaction is not the same as peace. Peace came later, in pruning rows at dawn with June, in watching a spring bloom come in clean after a hard winter, in seeing the lantern barn lit again and knowing the people inside had come for the right reasons, or at least reasons honest enough to name, and in understanding, finally, that there are things you can hold without rescuing them. A son, a brother, a marriage, a piece of land. You love them. You tell the truth about them. And when someone mistakes your love for permission, you let the structure answer for you.